my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Dr. Rola Rabah. I'm an oral maxillofacial surgery resident, and this is my weekly Q&A series. If you are new to this series, I release weekly Q&As every single week in order to answer your most commonly asked questions. I get a lot of these questions from my Instagram. If you don't already follow me, I'm at 15 Blades, and I get your questions from comments below. So if you have questions after this episode, make sure that you comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you are the first to know when I drop new videos. And without further ado, let's get started. This week's theme is going to be all about relationships, hence this cute little mug here. I just made my favorite tea, and I'm going to sip on it during this episode and talk about relationships. So relationships during residency. A lot of you guys know that I got engaged during residency. I was in a long distance relationship, and we are unfortunately still not married thanks to COVID-19, but we did move our wedding from last September to September 2021. So keeping our fingers crossed that the wedding will actually happen. But this episode, I'll focus on the questions that you want to know. So let's get started with question number one. What is your advice for long distance relationships? This is a really, really good question, you guys. Long distance relationships are extremely hard, especially when two individuals are really busy, but that does not mean that they are impossible. They are totally something that is common in the world of medicine. Lots of couples are long distance for whatever reason. A lot of times it's because you are pursuing a career and you don't have a lot of choices in the places that you end up after match. And so I know a ton of couples who have made it years and years and years as long distance. So it is difficult, but you can manage to do it if you have a bond with a special someone who is long distance. It is not the end all be all. So I do have a couple of advice for those who are long distance. And the biggest advice that I have is communication, being able to communicate your needs, your feelings, and what it is that you expect out of the relationship to your significant other. So being able to just say, hey, I really need to be able to say goodnight to you every night. So even though you're super busy and I'm super busy, I want to make sure that no matter what the day is, we set aside 10-15 minutes at the end of the day before either one of us goes to sleep, and we can kind of debrief about the day and say goodnight to each other. And that's how I want it done. For example, if you are long distance but still within travel range and you commit to seeing each other at least twice a month, and you say, hey, no matter what happens on these 2 weekends in the month, we're going to try our hardest to make it work and to be able to see each other, because that's important for our relationship to be able to have FaceTime together. Then you set those expectations and goals and you talk about it together. And so being able to communicate that instead of getting really upset and saying, oh, you didn't make an effort to see me this month. Well, did you talk about it? Did you communicate? Were you able to tell your partner that this is your expectation, these are your needs, and this is what you want? So communication is really key. So for my fiance and I, we communicated at the beginning of our long distance relationship. So the way, just to kind of backtrack, the way we started it is we met at NYU when we were students. I was on my way out and he was early on in his dental career. And we knew that we had a couple of months together in New York City, and we really took advantage of those couple of months. And then I was going to move to Boston. And so New York and Boston are about 4 to 5 hours apart driving. And so you can fly, you can drive, you can take the train, lots of different options. So we knew that we wanted to make the long distance work. And so we spent a lot of time together initially, and then we set some rules for the time that we became long distance. And those rules included trying to see each other at least twice a month. And I have to say that this was a big effort on Chris in the beginning of the relationship, because I had a really intense schedule and I had Ozzy that I was taking care of. And so the bus was out of the question and we both didn't have cars. And so really my only option was driving or taking the train with Ozzy, renting a car, taking a train or flying, and all of those options are kind of difficult when you don't have a car. Taking the train was sometimes convenient, sometimes not convenient, and so, you know, Chris ended up making the sacrifice and coming down from New York to Boston to visit me, and so he took the bus almost every other weekend, and so he made the biggest sacrifice. And that's another thing about long distance, is sometimes one person has to make the biggest sacrifice at the time being, and that sacrifice could change. You know, the next person could have a really busy schedule the following year or year after, and those sacrifices can be reversed. And so, but at one point, one person might have to put in a little bit more effort. So in the relationships, there should definitely be compromise and communication, and both parties putting in an effort. You can't have one person giving it 100 and one person giving it 0, but it's not always going to be equal. So it's not always going to be a 50-50 effort, just because sometimes you can't. So like, I would have loved to participate and be able to go down to New York more, but I just simply couldn't because of Ozzy and because of my strict schedule. And Chris had a little bit of flexibility, and so he was able to come down and make that sacrifice. So for a long time, it was more like 70-30. And so when Chris came to Boston, I made an effort to try to, you know, make the best out of our weekend and try to do things like that. But Chris had to make that effort. And now, while I'm on anesthesia and I have a little bit more free time, I'm the one who meal preps and makes food and does all of this stuff. So now I'm putting in a little bit more effort because he has a stricter schedule. And so again, our roles reverse all the time. And that is really key for a long distance relationship to work, is you have to compromise, but you can't expect for things to be 50-50 all the time. It's nice if it can, but that's not always going to happen. So that's my second piece of advice. And my last piece of advice is to really put in an effort to be emotionally and, you know, mentally available to your partner, because you can't be physically available there. There's a lot that comes from being face to face. You can comfort each other by just like looking at each other. You know, you don't even have to say words. You can kind of be silent. You can be affectionate. And when you're long distance, you don't have that. So you have to be able to put in effort so that you are mentally and emotionally available to your partner. You're able to just be vulnerable. You're able to, again, go back to the first advice, be able to communicate and say, you know, like, I really miss you today. And I think maybe that's why I'm frustrated. And that's why, you know, I'm feeling a little bit, you know, vulnerable. And just being able to communicate your vulnerabilities and your emotions to your partner is super, super, super important when you're long distance. And so, you know, I think this video requires like a entire separate YouTube video about long distance relationships, because there's so much to be said. But I think those are the 3 key things that I can cover in such a brief time. So again, communication, being able to compromise and put in an effort, not always 50-50, but you try to do that, but you're also understanding if that can't happen. And finally, being able to be emotionally and mentally available to your partner, because you can't depend on the physical aspects of a relationship when you're long distance. And so I hope that's helpful, you guys. I know long distance is really hard, but it can definitely work. And at the end, you really appreciate each other when you come together. Finally, you're no longer long distance. And so Chris and I's relationship has really gone in and out of being long distance. And I think we've really evolved and become very, very independent, but also been able to harmonize us coming together, because we've had that time to kind of set up a good foundation for our relationship when we were long distance. So hopefully that is a helpful answer for you guys. I'm not a relationship expert, but you know, when you've been long distance for a long time, I think you can learn a thing or two about your experience and you're able to share it with others. So question number 2, how do you find a partner with such a busy schedule? Yes, this is very difficult, you guys. It took me a very long time to meet someone that I felt really comfortable with. And I want to emphasize that, you know, there is no right time. You know, a lot of times when I was in dental school, I come from a Middle Eastern community, to a party and they'll be like, so, you know, like, when are you gonna get married? And it's like, oh, I don't know, like, I don't have a set date. It's not like I can, you know, just be like, oh, goal of, you know, 2020 is get married. Well, no, you know, so it took time to find a partner that supported me. And for me, my career is very important. So I had to find a partner that was gonna support me in my career and be able to, you know, have someone who could be excited for me for pursuing a career in surgery and not be intimidated by the fact that I'm in such an intense career, and not be intimidated by the fact that I might, you know, have to be overnight at a hospital. And, you know, that's not something that every partner is able to manage and tolerate. And so, you know, it took me a very long time to find someone that I can mesh with, and I think it was definitely worth it. So better than jumping into something, you know, when I am younger and not be, you know, a long-term compatible relationship. Really, really hard. You can't, you know, you can't schedule it, especially when you're busy and you're not really socializing and going out as much, but you just have to make yourself available and open to the idea. Chris was not the person that I thought that I would end up with, because, you know, I always thought like, oh, maybe like I'm gonna be with someone that's, you know, Middle Eastern or something, and that totally changed because I ended up finding compatibility, compassion, and, you know, with someone who was different. And so you have to stay open-minded, you have to stay emotionally available, and then things just happen. And I know it's cheesy to say, but when you know it's right, you know it's right. And so, you know, don't try to fit a square into a circle. If things aren't working out with someone, just move on. There's a lot of fish out there, and it's a big sea, and sometimes it might take you a little bit longer, but you will find someone that's compatible with you. And don't ever stay in a relationship that's toxic just to stay in a relationship, you guys. All right, so let's see. Last question. Are engagement rings allowed in the hospital and clinic? A very good question. I actually get this question all the time. And let me tell you, when I first got my engagement ring, I was so excited about it. I was wearing it everywhere, and now I don't ever wear it to the hospital anymore, because in the beginning, when I was like doing clinicals and you're in clinic and stuff like that, you can totally wear your ring. It's totally allowed. I think some hospitals are different, but generally speaking, in the hospital, in the clinical setting, you totally can wear rings. But if you're scrubbing into the OR, into a sterile case, you have to remove your jewelry completely in order to safely scrub. And that terrifies me, you guys. I have heard of so many horror stories of people removing their engagement rings and their expensive jewelry, putting it on like little necklaces or like little clips or ID badges or pockets, and they lose them and never see them again. So I'm terrified that that's going to happen. And so now that I'm more in my surgical years, I do not wear any of my expensive jewelry to the hospital. And I think it's much, much better, because it's not allowed in the operating rooms and you have to take them off, and I do not want that risk. Actually, even in the house, I don't ever take off my ring, even in the bathroom or in the shower or whatever. I take off my ring in one spot in my entire apartment and put it in that same spot. So anytime I don't have my ring on my hand, it's in that same spot. And I think that is the best way to make sure that you never, ever, ever lose your jewelry, which is very, very special to me. So that answers that final question. And that's it, you guys. A episode about relationships in medicine. I hope you find this episode full of love, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Make sure that you comment. Let me know if you have any other questions below. Like this video and follow me on Instagram at 15 Blades. I'll see you guys next week in our next Q&A series. Bye, guys.